Michael Jordan 2.0, Anthony Edwards says no. He says the comparisons need to stop and that he wants to be remembered as the first Anthony Edwards and not the next Michael Jordan. We are currently in this second round of the NBA playoffs without LeBron James, Steph Curry, or Kevin Durant in recent memory, a defining moment in ushering in the next generation of talent in the NBA, with Ant-Man and newly crowned MVP Nikola Jokic facing off in the second round of the playoffs, and many other games filled with talent such as Luka Doncic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jason Tatum, and our own ISU product, Tyrese Halliburton. These new faces have made for intriguing changes in who's dominant in the NBA, as the Timberwolves, Thunder, Pacers, Nuggets, and Mavericks have all ascended in recent years as their respective talents have elevated the franchises beyond where they typically stood in the previous era. The era of Curry, LeBron, KD, Russell Westbrook, Steve Nash, Tim Duncan, and Dwayne Wade. It's fading away, and the new NBA is being ushered in. Today is Friday, May 10th. I'm Matt Menson, and welcome to the Cornfield Sports Pod. No Blake today with us. I'm solo on the show today. And let's go right into the Timberwolves here. They hold a 2-0 series lead over the Denver Nuggets, including the second game at Denver, a absolutely dominant defensive showing from Minnesota where they beat the Nuggets 106-80. Both of the games against the Nuggets so far, they've held the Nuggets under 100 points. In game one, they held them to 99. But my goodness, holding the Nuggets to only 80 points, that might be the lowest scoring game for a single team in the NBA so far this season, regular season included. But in this game, they held the Nuggets to 35% shooting, only 10 fast break points. That is a really, really tiny number. 15 points in the second quarter. These are numbers that make they're bad for college numbers, and college numbers. I mean, college numbers are nothing compared to what NBA numbers put up, and these are bad for college numbers. And all of this. This was despite the absence of Rudy Gobert, who was on paternity leave and watching the game while holding his new son in his arms. But goodness, this is just absolute dominance from the Minnesota Timberwolves, the hottest team in the NBA right now, who has yet to lose a playoff game as they've won their last 6. And frustration right now showing for the Nuggets. In game 2, Jamal Murray, he threw a heat pack onto the court during the second quarter. And officials didn't actually see who threw it. Neither did Denver's coach. And no technical foul was assessed for it. Now, Murray did end up getting fined by the NBA after the fact. But nothing affecting the in-game play. But that really is showing something, when you're having players actually throw things onto the court, and it ain't even halftime yet. That's a lot of frustration, and only 15 points in the second quarter. I mean, that really is a pitiful showing. That's if you put that in like college level pace of play, that's a 60-point game. That's low. That'd be low scoring even for a college game, let alone NBA when you'd be expected to put up double that, at least some of the time. You're expecting 120-point games some of the time, and that's half of that pace. But I mean, the Timberwolves right now, since they have Karl-Anthony Towns back at the end of the regular season and now in the postseason, it's just been great. To be at the Target Center if you're a Minnesota fan, and I've been saying this during his injury that once he's back, it's going to be a massive benefit for the Wolves. And now in the postseason, he's posting 20.7 points per game and 9.0 rebounds per game. That's such a major boost for the Timberwolves that they didn't have while they were sliding at the end of the regular season from that top overall seed to the 3rd seed. and now they're looking like potentially the best team in the NBA. Right now, I legitimately do believe that they are the best team in the NBA. You don't go up 2 games to nothing on the defending champions and not have a claim to being the best team in the NBA. On top of that, the regular season, best regular season record team, the Boston Celtics, they've had a couple of head scratcher losses here in the playoffs so far, with a Game 2 loss in the first round against the Heat, and Game 2 loss now against the Cavaliers here in round 2. And Minnesota has just looked flawless so far through 6 games. The big 2 combo of Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, other teams, they're just going to continue to struggle to find answers on the inside. And if you want to try to find an answer, you're going to have to look to teams that have the best talent there, because nobody's got the kind of two-man prowess that Minnesota does. And Denver right now, they've got the current and previous MVP with Nikola Jokic, and he has not been an answer. In fact, Jokic himself said that he would need a duplicate clone of himself in order to compete against Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, and Naz Reid, who's been coming off the bench and also been a major contributor in the post. That 3-man committee has just been dominant, and nobody has an answer to it. And the attention that this pair commands has just opened up all kinds of gaps for Anthony Edwards on the inside. We've been talking about all the good stuff that he's been doing for weeks on end. But so far in the postseason, he's averaging 32.3 points per game. During Game 4 against the Suns and Game 1 against the Nuggets, he had 40-plus points in consecutive playoff games. And he is the only player to do it under the age of 22 other than Kobe Bryant, which really, really says something about just how good Anthony Edwards is. When people are comparing Anthony Edwards, to the Michael Jordans of the world and to the Kobe Bryants of the world, he doesn't want to be compared against them. He wants to be, the Anthony Edwards of the world. But, there's levels to this, and he's on that level. It's starting to look like, if he can sustain this kind of success for, a few years. But before he can focus on sustaining it for a few years, the Timberwolves need to focus on sustaining it tonight with an 8:30 tip-off at home against the Nuggets. That game will be on ESPN. Sunday, they will also host the Nuggets. That'll be a 7 o'clock tip-off on TNT. Tuesday, if necessary, they will return to the Nuggets on TNT, time to be determined. And then Thursday, if necessary, they will come back to the Target Center to play the Nuggets again. That will be 7:30 on ESPN. All right, let's continue talking basketball. Let's go to the college game here. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. If we look at the way too early rankings, there's some interesting talking points that you can get coming out of this. Let's start with the Iowa State men's. In the way too early rankings, they are number 3 on ESPN, with our most significant roster losses being Trey King, Robert Jones, and Hassan Ward. Those are, Trey King's a stretch 4. Robert Jones and Hassan Ward are definitely that center position. So, looking at, getting more big guys, which we're certainly doing. Deshaun Jackson from Charlotte should fill that role quite well. We're also adding, on the top of that transfer class, Joshua Jefferson from St. Mary's, an elite scorer. And let's take a look at the rest of the Big 12 here, because this really shows you just how much the media right now is respecting this conference as a whole as the best basketball conference in the country. 4 out of the top 5, and 5 out of the top 10 teams in the way too early rankings are Big 12 squads. At number 1 was Kansas. The return of Hunter Dickinson pretty much locked that in. Second, Houston. Third was us. Fifth, Baylor. 10th is Arizona, and then at 24th was Cincinnati. So, yeah, like I said, 5 of the top 10 teams in the way too early rankings are Big 12 squads. So, yeah, get ready for some more elite tier basketball when we get to November. And one of the things that is worth noting here, there's always someone who just doesn't quite live up to the hype. And then there's always someone who just comes out of nowhere. And they just pop up completely unexpectedly. And I think that team right now, the leading candidate for that slot has got to be BYU. Because they've completely fallen off the radar without Mark Pope at the helm. And, they've got roster changes because they had an old roster last year. So nobody really knows what to expect from BYU really at all. So don't count them out. Because just because you can't expect good things doesn't mean that you're expecting bad things either. If BYU pops off and ends up being the 11th best team in the country by the end of the year, would I be surprised? Maybe a little bit, but it's within the realm of possibility. And as far as teams that that are ranked high in the way too earlys, but could potentially fall off, the team that I'm looking at right now is Arizona. They seem like the obvious choice out of these ones, because the level of competition in the Big 12 is much more fierce than what they were playing in the Pac-12. In the Pac-12 it was Washington State and Arizona last year, and then it was everybody else. Those were the only 2 teams that were ranked at the end of the year. And this is a kind of adjustment that Arizona just has not had to make before. And they've got a lot of roster turnover in Tucson, which doesn't necessarily help them make the adjustment, because experience in tough games, and in March Madness and things like that will help them carry over into a tougher conference schedule. They're not going to be returning that much. As Kylan Boswell, Omar Ballo, and Pal Larson are all going to the transfer portal and NBA draft respectively, and then Caleb Love and KJ Lewis, their future in Tucson is also uncertain, but they still could in theory return. That's what it's looking like for Big 12 men's basketball. If we take a look at the way too early rankings right now, obviously this stuff is going to change as we get closer to the season. We find out more stuff with the transfer portal and the draft as players do end up returning. Let's take a look at women's ball too here. Way too early rankings. Iowa State was slotted in the 10th spot on ESPN. The return of Emily Ryan is going to mean that the Cyclones have one of the best on-court leaders for one more season in Ames. And what a joy it is to have Emily Ryan back in Ames for one last go-round on the hardwood, because we didn't expect necessarily to have her even last year, after in the 2 seasons ago, after the season was done. Large portion of the roster enters the transfer portal. People were beginning to expect that Emily Ryan was going to enter the transfer portal as well. Well, most of the players that she had signed up to play with had decided to leave, and she was essentially going to have to work with what was a brand new team this year. And she ended up staying, leading the way. Earn that name, the General, and that's what she's going to continue to do for one more go-round in her last year of eligibility next year, as she uses the COVID year. She's in that last class of the COVID year students, so she'll be using that, and we'll get one last year with Emily Ryan running the point in Ames. And Iowa State is going to be focused on a very deadly inside-outside approach going into the 2024 to 2025 season. This is going to be Audie Crooks being the primary commander of post-tension. And, of course, that doesn't mean we should be dismissing Addie Brown, who was our rebound leader last year. And she can, reach the post. She can get points in the paint, too. And then incoming transfer Lily Talele out of UMass will further supplement post play. Definitely an addition to depth that we needed, not having Nelly Nadabu next year. It's a great addition by Fennelly from the transfer portal. And as we look at the rest of what he did in the transfer portal this year, Bill Fennelly created a small army of snipers from three-point land. We got 6 excellent shooters on this team that will be major contributors next year. We got Mackenzie Hare, who's transferring in from Marquette, Sydney Harris, who's transferring in from TCU. Both of them shot over 40% from three-point last year. And then we're also adding Lily Hansford from Oregon State, who's an excellent shooter. We needed to replace Hannah Bellinger. I think somewhere in there is a sharpshooter who can replace Hannah Bellinger. And then on top of that, you've got returners Ariana Jackson and Kelsey Jones, who have a full year of experience under their belt in D1 ball now. And of course, the general herself, Emily Ryan, who we all know can shoot a three-pointer. She can pass. She can drive. Steve Nashes her way to the basket and then back out and makes an on-point pass to Audie Crooks because that's what she does. She can do it all. Very, very versatile, experienced player in Emily Ryan. The rest of the Big 12 in his way too early rankings, ESPN's got Baylor at number 9, right ahead of us. They have Kansas State at 14. They have West Virginia at 16, and they have newcomer Utah at number 22. And for the same logic as Arizona on the men's side, Utah, I think, is going to be the biggest question mark of the way too early teams among the women's teams from the Big 12. That said, I don't think that the principle can be extended nearly as far as it can be with Arizona on the men's side, and that's because Pac-12 women's basketball, unlike men's basketball, was very strong in its final year, led by USC and UCLA, who are going to the Big Ten now, and Stanford, who's headed to the ACC. All of these teams were, top seeds in March Madness last year, and Utah was a tough team to contend against. And the biggest question for Utah is not necessarily the change of competition, but losing their star player Alyssa Peely to the first round of the WNBA draft. And it leaves some questions for Utah as they now go without who is far and away their best talent from the 2023 to 2024 squad. All right, let's talk softball briefly here. Angelina Allen earned all Big 12 second-team honors as Iowa State's season ended in an extra inning heartbreaker at the Big 12 tournament in Oklahoma City. It was a 10-9 loss to Texas Tech Wednesday in 8 innings. The Cyclones, going into the bottom of the 4th inning, they led 6 runs to nothing. And after that, they did allow that lead to be chipped away. The game ended tied for the highest scoring Big 12 tournament game on record with 19 runs scored. And Malaysia Ochoa, in her final game with ISU, had 5 ribbies, also tied for the most by a single player in a Big 12 tournament game. That will end the athletic year for Iowa State as we now enter the summer lull for college sports. So let's go to Major League Baseball now, since that's about all we have left to cover. No NHL left to cover for local teams, and only one NBA team still alive. NFL has been done for a while. Time to talk some baseball here. Minnesota Twins, still the hottest team in baseball, 15 wins in their last 17 games. During that stretch, they only scored less than 5 runs 4 times. They have not scored less than 3 runs. And by win percentage in the last week, they passed the Royals in the AL Central standings. Both of those teams are still a game and a half behind the Guardians, so technically they're tied for second. And then in the previous week, they passed the Tigers. They've shot up from fourth to second in the AL Central standings right now, looking good. And in the last week, that looked like a 2-1 series win against the Boston Red Sox at home. The win streak ended at 12 with that 9-2 loss to Boston in Sunday's rubber game. And then they went 3-1 in their series against the Mariners. Upcoming here for the Twins, they will have a 3-game series at the Blue Jays that begins tonight. And then after that, they'll have a 3-game series versus the Yankees, which will begin on Tuesday. And that first game will be a TBS Tuesdays game. So hopefully that one isn't blacked out. TBS games can be a little bit weird with how those blackouts end up working. White Sox here. Previous week, they went 3-3, which is a step up from the usual, like, 1-5 or 1-6. They went 2-1. They actually had a series win at the Cardinals, and then went 1-2 at the Rays. So they didn't sweep the Rays this time like they did the previous time. And then they began their series against the Cleveland Guardians with a win. But in those 3 losses last week, the White Sox scored 0, 2, and 1 run, respectively. And in the 3 out of the 4 wins, they've allowed no more than 2 runs. So for the White Sox, it's a matter of what team is showing up to each game, because that's making a huge difference. Is it the team that's pitching well and manufacturing offense, or is it the team that forgot what defense is and can't hit to save their life? Because if we look at the first 38 games of the season, the latter one is certainly the more prevalent one, and that's when they've been the worst hitting team in Major League Baseball. I would imagine that it generally stays that way, and that's probably how their entire season is generally going to go. They're not on pace anymore for being the worst team in MLB history, but it's still looking very much like a season that's going to be difficult to salvage for the White Sox. They don't have a lot of roster pieces to trade when the deadline comes up. They're in a position to sell team with no assets to sell. But for now, they'll be continuing their series with 3 more games against the Cleveland Guardians. They will then have a 3-game series versus the Washington Nationals, and then they will take a trip to New York and begin a 3-game series at the New York Yankees. The Kansas City Royals in the last week, 1-2 versus the Rangers. Tough series for the fans to have to watch. During the second game of that series, they allowed 15 runs. Just no defense to be found in that game. And then they lost 3-2 in extras during the rubber game on Sunday. They went 2-1 against the Brewers after that. And then they began their series at the Los Angeles Angels with a win. But across the last 6 wins, the Royals averaged 6 runs per game, which is enough to sustain a victory in most games where pitching is struggling. And some of those games are pitching did, not have the greatest game, allowing 4 to 5 runs. But if you're going to score 6 runs a game, you'll win those games. And they've won 6 of their last 9 games by playing generally the same way across games, win or lose. It's the same strategy, the same efficacy. And if you stay consistent and you know what's going to win you games, just keep doing it. And that's the strategy that the Royals have gone with. Is it going to win them every game? No. But it's going to win them a lot of series. And that's what they need to do. That's what's going to get them to the postseason. And that's certainly how you win postseason, is by winning series. So upcoming for the Royals, they will have 3 more games at the Angels. Tonight's game will be an Apple TV Plus broadcast for the 0 of you that actually have that. And then a 3-game series at the Mariners. All right, let's move from the AL Central to the NL Central here for the teams surrounding the state of Iowa. Let's start with the Cubs this time here. the previous week, 2-1 against the Brewers. Tylon and Assad remain undefeated on the mound. The Cubs claimed a shutout win on the Assad start. And then the Cubs went 1-2 against the Padres, and they were shut out in the last game of the series. So the Cubs they're hot and cold. They oscillate up and down a lot. But as long as they stay hot more than they stay cold, they can continue to compete for the top of the NL Central with the Brewers here, who are equally as streaky as the Cubs. And neither one of these teams can seem to get any ground or pull away from the other at all. But sitting once again, only a half game behind the Brewers for the Cubs. Their hitting needs to take a step up to keep up with the pitching, at least with the starting rotation anyway, which is looking like the best in the MLB right now with Tylon, Assad, Imanaga, and Wesneski having a combined record of 13 wins and 1 loss, which means basically all of the losses that they have are given up by their really weak bullpen, giving up a lot of runs late in games, and the Cubs batting lineup just not able to sustain enough offense late in games to keep other teams out of it. But for the Cubs, upcoming, they'll have a 3-game series at the Pirates, and tomorrow's game will be the anticipated MLB debut of top pitching prospect Paul Skeens for the Pirates. Skeens, in his first year of professional baseball after playing for LSU in college, winning the College World Series a year ago. Against Skeens will be the return of Cubs veteran Justin Steele. He'll be making that start, so it's an experience versus youth matchup, as both of them have not pitched in the MLB for a hot minute, with Skeens having not pitched at the show at all. So welcome to the show, Paul Skeens. We'll see if Justin Steele can pull out a victory against you. After that series with the Pirates, the Cubs will have a 3-game series at the Atlanta Braves before they return back to Wrigley for another series against the Pirates. The Milwaukee Brewers, here in their last week, 1-2 at the Cubs. As previously mentioned, in that series, Freddie Peralta took his first L on the season in that rubber game shutout. And then the Brewers 1-2 at the Royals, again, as mentioned earlier. But that lone win in KC ended with a Willy Adames walk-off 3-run homer. After Adames called his shot to Royals fans behind the Milwaukee dugout, they're chirping each other, and Adames called his shot, 3-run homer to win the game. They were down by 2. He blasted it over the wall, and that was the end of the game. And then after that, the Brewers began a series with the St. Louis Cardinals, which they had a 7-1 win in, where they went yard 3 times against Sonny Gray. But the Brewers still clinging to that top spot in the NL Central after having more losses than wins here in this last week, including those 2 losses to the primary competitor for the top spot in Chicago. So it's a matter of who's going to get hot for just a little bit longer right now to create a gap for first in the NL Central right now. Upcoming for the Brewers, they got 3 more games against the Cardinals. It's a good opportunity to create some wins here. Left-handed pitcher Robert Gasser will make his MLB debut tonight. Last season, Gasser went 9-1 in 26 games with AAA Nashville. And then Saturday's game between the Brewers and Cardinals will be broadcast on Fox. That'll be a national game. And then after their series with the Cardinals, the Brewers will host the Pittsburgh Pirates. The St. Louis Cardinals here in the last week, not been pretty. They had 1 win against the White Sox before losing 2 against the White Sox. 0-2 in their series against the Mets. The rubber game was postponed until later in the season. And then they started their series against the Brewers with that aforementioned loss where Sonny Gray allowed those 3 blasts. So yeah, I think you can fairly say that the Cardinals are as cold as the Twins are hot, with that 5-game losing streak, with two losses to the White Sox. It's not good to be a Cardinals fan right now. Your record's not as bad as the White Sox or the Marlins, but it's a brutal stretch right now if you're in St. Louis. Upcoming for the St. Louis Cardinals, they'll have 3 more games at the Brewers. As previously mentioned, that Saturday game's on Fox. And then they'll begin a 3-game series at the Angels. And that'll do it for today's show. Make sure you follow the Cornfield Sports Pod on Twitter at CSportsPod. You can find Blake at BlakeAttack1846. Find me at SFMattISU. Tap the follow button on Spotify, plus button on Apple. Subscribe on YouTube, on Rumble. I'm Matt Menson, and this has been the Cornfield Sports Pod.